Hello and welcome to this News Unlock special, the show that takes you behind the headlines and looks at the real stories that matter. Today we focus on what's been happening in France over the last few days. On 29th of October, France was jolted by another terror attack. An attacker with a knife went on a rampage in a church in the city of Nice, killing 3 people. This is the third such attack inside 2 months in France. Remember, there was a school teacher who was beheaded in Paris for showing a cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad to his class. All of this has prompted debates in France and across the world over lines between freedom of speech, between religious freedom and laws like blasphemy versus constitutional laws. It has also brought the spotlight back on Islamic extremism and its violent overtones. Before we go to a very special guest today, let's take a look at a report about the Nice, France attack and its fallout.
The French city of Nice is mourning. On 29th of October, 3 people were killed in a knife attack in what is now suspected as religious terror attack.
Bien, mesdames, messieurs, une fois encore, notre pays a été frappé par une attaque terroriste islamiste.
The police claim the attacker, a 21-year-old Tunisian national who had recently entered France, beheaded a woman and killed 2 other people in the church on Thursday morning before being shot and detained by the police. The Nice attack comes nearly 2 weeks after a school teacher was beheaded near Paris for showing a cartoon of Prophet Muhammad in his class. Since then, France has seen many protests in support of free speech.
Il ne fait aucun doute que l'auteur de ces actes, qui n'a cessé de répéter en boucle devant nous Allahu Akbar alors qu'il était médicalisé sur place, quel était le sens de son geste.
The French President Emmanuel Macron has now promised a crackdown on Islamist extremism and claimed France was engaged in an existential battle against radical Islamic ideologies and separatism.
Si nous sommes attaqués, une fois encore, c'est pour les valeurs qui sont les nôtres, pour notre goût de la liberté, pour cette possibilité sur notre sol de croire librement et de ne céder à aucun esprit de terreur. Et je le dis avec beaucoup de clarté une fois encore aujourd'hui, nous n'y céderons rien.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan went so far as to call the French president a madman who needed mental help. This prompted France to call back its envoy from Ankara. Meanwhile, Pakistan claimed Macron is spreading Islamophobia. The impact is economic too. Many Islamic nations across the world have started boycotting French products and carrying massive rallies against France. In India, there have been protests against President Macron because of the harsh words he had used to describe fanatical supporters of Islam. The government of India officially extended its support and sympathies to the Republic of France.
And joining me now today is Bangladesh-born writer and activist Taslima Nasreen, who has spent more than 25 years in exile, targeted by extremist Islamic groups for her writings. Appreciate you joining us, Taslima Nasreen. Let's understand from you, when you first heard about these attacks that have taken place in France in the last week, the beheading of a school teacher, then the attacks in a church, your first reaction, what was it?
I was very shocked, but you know, what I think that this terrorism will be continued until Islam is reformed. And You know, it is very important to stop indoctrination of children with irrational faith at home and institutions like mosques and madrasas. Children should be raised to have rational, logical minds and to adopt scientific outlooks so that they can distinguish between right and wrong. Otherwise, preaching the principles of freedom of expression alone won't work.
No, let's develop that point, because here we are talking of France, a country that has always prided itself as being a hard secular state which separates church from state, whereas President Macron says he's completely committed to freedom of speech above all else. Now, in such a society, can there be place for blasphemy laws? Has the time come to eliminate blasphemy laws above all else across the world? Is this a problem that Islam or Islamic teachings have incompatible with notions of free speech?
Islam is not compatible with democracy, human rights, women's rights, and freedom of expression. I think that France struggled for years and decades to have this democracy and freedom of expression. And they won't leave it only because some Muslim fanatics, want to practice their barbaric religion. You know, the Muslims, whoever came to live in France, used the liberal traditions of France and used the democracy and human rights of France or other Western countries to practice their barbaric religion. You know, in France and other Western countries, they have freedom of expression as well as religious freedom. But it is very big problem for unreformed religion to have the same freedom as reformed religions have. Because, already female genital mutilations, polygamy, child marriage are practiced by Muslims, which is totally opposite to Western liberal democratic ideology. So what should be done? I think that Islam should be reformed and mosques and madrasas should be checked what actually they are teaching. And so many terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Boko Haram, and Al-Shabaab are there, So we have to understand what actually make Muslims to take up arms and for terrorism.
Let me though look at the other side. While you sort of engage in this criticism of Islam as a religion, let's look at the other side. Because what you've also got is a number of Muslim leaders from Muslim majority countries, and I don't refer here to clerics, I refer to politicians who've come out and said that religious sentiments must be respected, that you cannot draw cartoons of the Prophet, degrade the Prophet, and then call it freedom of speech. People have their religious sentiments that need to be respected, and there needs to be mutual respect for each other's faith. How do you respond to that there is this concern that religious sentiments of Muslims are routinely violated?
Without offending religious sentiments, there would not be any freedom of speech. And we have hundreds of different sentiments, and our sentiments get hurt every day. But we adults can cope with those. But the problem is that Muslims who claim that religious sentiments should be intact must not be hurt. They are not grown up. They have to cope with the with that hard sentiments, of course, because otherwise no democracy and freedom of expression will be there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we are critical of religious beliefs. We are critical of Islamic dogmas, but we are hacked to death. We are not allowed to be critical of religion. You know, Islam has been largely exempted from critical scrutiny that other religions have undergone to modernize them. Islam has to go through the enlightenment process that other religions have gone through by questioning unethical, unequal, unscientific, irrational, inhuman, and barbaric aspects of religion.
You know, there are, you know, let's look at this also. There is, though, Taslima Nasreen, a wave of intolerance across the world, which may not necessarily be specific to Islam. Let's say today, if someone in India denigrates Hindu gods, there is often a reaction that we see to that as well. My point is, when you see this wave of intolerance, is it specific to Islam? Is the challenge therefore for only Islamic societies to reform? Is that what you're suggesting, that there is something specific to Islam here?
You know, why people try to demonize? Because, you know, there are reasons. You know, why Islamophobia? Who created this word, Islamophobia? It's Islamic fundamentalists created this word to stop, to go against freedom of expression. Mm-hmm. You know, Christianity is not a very peaceful religion. Christianity was a violent religion during the Middle Ages. You know, whoever was critical of Christian faith was killed. They were killed. You know, there were inquisitions. Now Islamic Inquisition is going on. The thing is that in Christian countries, they separated religion and church, because once upon a time, church had so. Yeah, this space, because, you know, mm-hmm. Hinduism is also very anti-women religion, but it was reformed. There are laws which actually assures women to have equal rights.
The point is,
Islamic laws still are against women, against human rights, against free speech. So, of course, there are some Hindu fundamentalists who are behaving like Islamic fundamentalists, but the law is, you know, the Hindu laws or Christian, you know, laws in Western countries are secular. Which means that they have, you know, equality between men and women.
But, you know, who's going to do? Let's accept that Islam needs to go through this process of enlightenment, as you're calling it, or reforms. You've got President Macron in France saying that he's going to fight Islamic separatism and going to sort of bring in a sort of enlightenment to Islam in France. Do you believe that this can be done really by Western liberals? Or do you believe that the challenge of reforming actually lies, if Islam is a religion in crisis, has to be done by within Islamic societies, that the reform must begin in mosques, with imams, with clerics, with the school education system you spoke of? Is that where the real challenge is today?
You know, reform should come from within, and Muslim countries should secularize their state, society, and education system. It's very important. But Islamic terrorists actually terrorize the whole world. So I think that world leaders have to play some, you know, roles here. And, you know, the world leaders, especially the Western countries leaders, you know, have very good relations with the fundamentalist Islamic countries. Most of the 9/11 terrorists are from Saudi Arabia, but Europe and America have very good relations with Saudi Arabia. Why not, you know, put pressure on Islamic countries who actually kind of harbor terrorists and who have no human, do not believe in any women's rights and human rights and freedom of expression. I think that world leaders should put on pressure because they have trade relations. They should, only that reformation would not come from within if we do not, put pressure on those Muslim countries which are very, very much fundamentalist and that terrorists are born there. Are the breeding grounds, mosques and madrasas, and some countries are the breeding grounds for terrorists.
Yeah, but let's also look at it this way, that these countries which are supposedly the breeding grounds, as you call it, for terrorism or for Islamic fundamentalism, who is targeted? It's their own. Whether it's in your country, Bangladesh, whether it's in Saudi Arabia, the victims of any form of terrorism, violence, are in most instances Muslims themselves. It's Muslims who have targeted Muslims, and people like you have been forced into exile. Therefore, again, it comes back to it. Has the real battle to be fought within Islam between the moderates and extremists, between the reformers and those who are fundamentalists?
The reformers' voices are shut down, like many reformers, many critics of Islam were hacked to death in Bangladesh. Many free thinkers and human rights defenders in Muslim countries are in prison, or they are exiled, or they are killed. So reformers alone cannot change society. So I think that from every side, all sane people should fight against this insane religion and insane people who are blinded by religion and who are who take arms for terrorism. I think that it should be fought by everyone, even by Western countries, because they are sufferers too. So it's not only the reformers and free thinkers in Muslim countries or moderate Muslims are sufferers. I think that sane people in the world, whoever is critical of Islam, is sufferer.
But look, I want to ask you this again, and this lies at the heart of, in a sense, what's happening in France in particular. The notion of freedom of speech. Can it ever be absolute? Are you telling me that in a way, as you said earlier, the right to offend is intrinsic to free speech, but should a line be drawn, an exception to it, that you cannot accept what some will show as hate speech, and hate speech must be seen as incompatible, Taslima Nasreen, with free speech?
What kind of hate speech? If you do not ask for violence, if you do not commit violence, then it's fine. Then it's everything, then absolute freedom. I believe in absolute freedom of expression until you commit violence. Then it is not anymore freedom of expression. And I think that the cartoons are shown in France is very good decision, so that Muslims can get used to seeing the cartoons.
No, but let's be clear. There is an element of what is seen as Islamophobia. And there is, of course, the reality also of Islamic terror. So you've got Islamophobia, you've got Islamic terror. Is therefore, at the end of the day, the real challenge reform, the real challenge critical thinking, the real challenge enlightenment, that, as Macron said, the Islam of France needs to be the Islam of enlightenment. Do you see this therefore slowly spreading? Do you believe that in a way that events like what have happened in France will wake up a lot of people, and that, or do you believe that the indoctrination of a lot of young people will continue? Do you see hope? Do you believe we can be hopeful about the future?
Yeah, it's not only in France. Everywhere it is happening. The mosques and madrasas are becoming breeding grounds for terrorists, and everywhere, the children Muslim children are indoctrinated with Islam, violent Islam. And the problem is that political Islams. These political Islams want to make this whole world land of Islam, and they want to rule the whole world. They don't, because they don't believe in freedom of expression, democracy, and human rights. So they don't care. But the problem is that they use the religious freedom of Western countries to establish their violent religion, which should not happen.
It certainly should not happen. Whatever our views, and there will be those who will disagree with some of the extreme views, some would say, of a Taslima Nasreen. One thing is very clear. It is unacceptable that if you differ with someone else, you resort to violence. Violence is unacceptable, because that's when you cannot have a meaningful debate on issues of free speech and religious freedom in particular. Taslima Nasreen, thank you so much for joining me here on the News Unlocked. As always, it is the news without the noise. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.